What is up, guys? Lord Nick here, bringing you another One Piece related video. This video, guys, is going to be my take on the ban announcement that is coming out potentially at the end of the World's Tournament, which will be firmly, the West will be firmly in OPO6 at that point, though that tournament will be OPO5 so that everybody's on an even playing ground. So a lot of people are speculating what they believe to be the bans, and the original announcement site that I saw also said that these are the most likely bans, which was going to be Rebecca and Moria are completely gone, both of them just gone, just not even allowed to be played. A restriction on 10 drops Charlotte Linlin, which I think is stupid, and then what was the last one was just something so ridiculous to me that I was just like, that just doesn't seem like at all. Unbanning Moby Dick, because that card's not problematic somehow, some way. It's not a problematic card. So I guess we should pull up Moby Dick here so we can at least reference that card. I'll try to find the article in the Discord where it got posted. I was not a fan of it, to be honest. I felt like this was probably one of the most short-sighted opinions on the matter, and I have found that at this point I'm just not engaging with people anymore in Discords, because I like rhetoric, I like discussion, I like talking, I like concepts. I want people to think about the things they're asking to happen, not just, oh, you know what, I want this to happen because I don't like this. That is one of the most short-sighted, I almost said stupid, but short-sighted opinions that you can have, and having that type of narrow of a view of it is bad. Like, I mean, okay, cool, okay, let's just ban everything you hate. What are we gonna be left with? Oh, we have mono red, and that's all that's left. Like, we're not going back to that, guys. Red meta was super oppressive because when aggro is the best deck and there is no answer to aggro, there is no interactivity in the game. Your interactivity is, can I beat my opponent faster? And that's not fun. You're playing solitaire race. Like, it's not, how is that a fun meta? Like, I enjoy playing a good aggro deck, like in a meta where there is actual constraints on me. I come from a background of having played a ton of different card games. And I feel like people that have also been in those card games can agree that this meta is good. Like, this meta isn't, like, it's not great. I mean, there are some issues that I have with this meta, but, like, that is mainly due to the fact that I don't agree that triggers need to be so powerful for one color and pretty much so missing in every other color. Yellow having life manipulation is great, but they shouldn't have so many trigger options. Like, if you're going to give them the ability to manipulate their life, you can make some powerful triggers, but you shouldn't make everything have a trigger. Because then we'd end up in the situation now where they run like 23 trigger cards, so there's almost never a miss. Which just means that for me to win the game, I need to be able to banish your life, but we don't have banish options, so they either need to go one route or another, which is start getting rid of some of the trigger cards, which they're not going to do, that's too many bans, or you start adding in relevant ways to dealing with trigger cards, like banish, or hey, if I attack you, this character says if I attack, the card can't trigger, right? Like, stuff like that would be fine, and I think that's a balance change that needs to be had, but I don't think like removing cards is necessary. But the reason I have these cards on the screen here, they're either cards that have been mentioned that need to be restricted or banned, or a card that needs to come back for whatever reason. But my own personal opinion, and I didn't make it that clear in my last video about kind of bans, restrictions, fixing the metas. So my own personal opinion is these two colors are a little too strong, and that's just due to the fact that our representation of these two colors is absurdly high compared to the next best color, which is probably purple, and then green right after. So I think, yes, we do need to see a little less representation from these colors. I do like that there are multiple variants within these colors that are showing up, though they're not that different per se. They do have a little bit of a different tweak, like Moria and Sokka is a little different, but like Kata and Anel isn't that much different. One's a bit more aggressive, I guess, but I would love to see more variants of play, which is why I am somewhat excited now for Egghead. I think that will be an interesting take on the yellow dynamic. Having a leader that can't attack, having a leader that only has 2 life, or he might be able to attack, but a leader that only has 2 life and has to play from a real nasty deficit to start because he has so many powerful options, I think is kind of neat. But if we were to look at these cards, if we were to actually like diagnose what's wrong with the meta, I don't think there's anything wrong with the meta. I don't think there's anything wrong with any of these cards in an individual vacuum. It's generally the fact that when you add these cards together in each of their respective colors is where some of the problems may occur in terms of fun, not necessarily actual like brokenness. I don't think, like, if we saw Sakazuki winning, I'd say close to 90 to above of the tournaments, we have a legitimate problem. We don't see that, by the way. If you go to Eggman sites, or if you go to any of the sites that show tournament winnings, Saka is probably sitting at about 70 to 75% of the meta at many of the tournaments because people perceive him to be the best. But if you kind of take into consideration conversion ratios, the fact that we're getting relatively even numbers of yellow who are playing far less parts in the meta sometimes than him, you start to see, oh, okay, maybe Saka isn't the best deck. He's a strong deck in good hands, which is something, but you do need to be a skilled player to be successful with him, which I think is a limiting factor on the deck. If it was a deck like, I don't know, Whitebeard, or well, Whitebeard does take a bit more skill than most of the red decks, so you know what, we'll take Whitebeard out of there. I still think red takes a lot less skill than most decks, but it does take more skill than the rest of the red decks. Let's put Zoro in there, right? Zoro has 1 to 2 win conditions. I beat you over the face early, or I beat you over the face late. Like, that's his win condition. It's a very straightforward one. To do well in this meta, you have to be very good at Zoro and not make mistakes. But in general, to be good at Zoro, it's not that hard. But in a meta like this, where the actual meta is pretty against him in many ways, then yeah, you need to be playing it perfectly, which can make an easy deck hard. But the deck itself doesn't require a whole lot of skill to understand what the deck wants to do. Sakazuki's deck does take a bit of skill to understand what it wants to do. You can argue, oh, well, I know what it wants to do. It wants to control the board state and swing. That's great. How do you control the board state? Well, I just wipe their stuff. Well, what happens if you wipe the wrong target and now they have a very sticky and nasty card that you can't get rid of? Well, I just draw until I get a card that gets rid of it. Okay, well, you've taken 6 damage in that time and you only have 4 life. How many cards are left in your hand? Well, none. Okay, well, how many of those are 2K? How many of the cards, let's just say, theoretically, you have no 2K counters because you're not building towards that. You didn't tell me you're building towards that. You told me you're building towards removal. So now you don't have any 2K counters because you didn't build your hand up like that. Okay, so what I am pointing to here is you're not hand managing properly because you're not thinking about, oh, okay, the resource I need to keep together is my hand. What resources do I need to keep? What's the perfect balance of 2Ks and cards that I need for removal? Likewise, you're not thinking about what card do I need to draw off of this for this to be worth it. Are there a good chance of me drawing this? Is this cycle worth it, or are the cards in my hand more valuable than the cycle? Do I need more cards in my trash because the cards in my hand can't work without that? Okay, well, I don't really want to get rid of any of these 5 cards, but which of these 5 cards is the least valuable in my hand? These are all questions you have to answer while playing Sakazuki. That is, to me, a lot of skill, whereas with Zoro, it's, which of these cards do I want to play? I have 4 searchers in hand. Which searcher do I think is more valuable in this situation? Do I think I'm going to hit 1-drops, or do I think I'm going to hit the cards that I have, that I need? Okay, you know what? Do I need, like, you ask which searcher do I play because you need to know, okay, do I need a Diamble Jambe? Do I need a Rad Beam? Okay, no, then I don't really need to play the Nami. Would I like to have another 1-drop? Or I don't need to play Nami or Buggy, really, right? Like, both of those are kind of answered there. Okay. Then do I need to play Curly to get more cards in hand? Sure, might as well. And then I play those characters because, okay, if I still have the Dawn for it, I'll just play these other characters because I need to develop more characters. The fact they give me a card back just gives me a little bit of defensive tools or an aggressive tool in the case of Diamble to help finish out the game. Otherwise, it's like, okay, we're on turn 3 or 4. Is this the turn that I want to play my Luffy? No, not really. Okay, I'll play Zoro. That's essentially what like Red's thought process is. It's a lot more straightforward. It's a lot more easy. Sakazuki has a lot more aspects of it that you have to think through. So the whole point of this part of the conversation here is to prove that Sakazuki is not an easy deck. It is not a deck of like, easy, straightforward win. I remove everything, I win the game. If you can remove everything, great. But what happens when you don't roll that hand? How do you get out of that? Well, that comes down to your natural skill and ability to pilot the deck. And that's where it becomes hard. And that's where a good Sakazuki player will capitalize and show how strong the deck can be. Meanwhile, the average or less than average Sakazuki player is going to lose. Easy as that. Now, when we look at yellow, for instance, my issue was already made. Triggers are too consistent. Which then allows their late game to be so oppressive because their triggers buy them time to get to the late game, which is problematic in and of itself. It wouldn't be problematic if it was just occasionally they hit triggers, or hey, I have to really work my early game into making sure my triggers are in my life. That to me would be fine. The problem is they run 23 triggers. They don't need to make sure they're in their life. In the case of Katakuri, he gets to just replace them. In the case of Enel, he just keeps going down to 1 until he replaces it and hits a trigger that he wants. Which is problematic in and of itself. Like, we just don't have ways of dealing with that, because if I beat an L down and he doesn't get triggers, he just has card advantage over me, and that means he'll always have cards to be able to be like, all right, we replace one there, and you need 3 attacks to make sure you can get through his life when he's at 1, which is really stupid. On top of that, if he hits a trigger out of either of those 2 lives that he is now down to, any of them could stop your 3 attacks from being 3 attacks, which just puts him into a position that's fine. And if you can't wipe him when you put him down to 1, the next turn he gets to Yamato heal up, or he gets to Katakuri put something back into his life. Like, he has so many ways to get out and back to the I have 3 life when he's at 1, that a Nell feels very oppressive in that regard. But I think the bigger problem there is the fact that he has so many triggers that it's a problem. Not necessarily that his top end becomes a problem, but in the current vacuum of things, because we can't answer the triggers with a ban, right? Like, there's not a way of being like, we banned this one trigger and he's doomed. It just doesn't work that way. There's too many triggers that are valuable for him. You'd have to ban so many cards, and that's not an option. That's not a good solution. Because then you're also telling us that you designed an entire you put an entire card design incorrectly. You made this entirely false, like, building of how you wanted the representation of yellow. So what you need to do then is, in other colors, it doesn't have to be black, it doesn't have to be blue, it could be green, it could be red, I don't know, something outside of yellow that gets an answer to triggers. Like, maybe making an evergreen mechanic that goes to all colors, including yellow. Everybody gets this ability of a character or 2 that become a staple character, or maybe it's an event even. It's an event that says this turn your characters don't trigger. If you make an attack on your opponent's life, your characters and leaders do not trigger. So that means, like, okay, it doesn't banish the card. You still get the card, but you can't activate, or your opponent can't activate triggers this turn. Massive. Yes, it's an investment card, and it's a tech card that every color would then have to be running. But I think that's good. That adds more deck design, more building things. We're gonna see, okay, do I run one of these? Is just okay, this is my turn, this is the turn I go for it all. Is it, I run 4 of these because I want to get chip damage in here and there, and want to make sure you're not getting any advantage back. I think that's a card that would add a ton of design, and it helps solve the meta from being so stagnant with yellow and black at the top. Now, in terms of how do you solve black, well, it's just you realize what black wants. You realize, okay, if my opponent is good, what cards of mine is he going to target? So do I play this card on curve, or is it better if I play it off curve, right? Do I bait my opponent into killing this card? How much is this card a necessity for what I'm planning to do? you have to start reevaluating your deck versus the matchup. It requires you to think. I get that. Some of you want to come do this because it's your hobby and you want to brain off and you don't have to think about that. But if you're going to one of your locals, or if you only have one locals, and that locals is filled with sweaty, super competitive players, you might consider asking some of the people you do like playing with, what if we just play for fun? Like, is the prize that meaningful to you? Because if you're playing and you're like, I want to win the prize pack, then you are trying to be somewhat competitive. Like, you may not be at the same level as some of those sweats, but you're trying to be competitive. So you should put in a bit more effort, even if it's just a little bit of effort, to learn, okay, well, my meta is filled with nothing but Sakazukis. How do I beat Sakazuki? Okay, well, what does Sakazuki like to do? What does my deck like to do? Is there a way I can protect my win condition and stifle his? You'd be surprised with how many options is if you only have to build into one deck, it becomes kind of easy. When there's so many decks, that's when it becomes hard, and that's why this meta is hard. There's a lot of decks you have to optimize against. So you have to choose, okay, do I see that many yellow? No, there's one guy that plays yellow. Okay, then let me build in a way that makes me lose to yellow, but makes me stronger into the other matchups. And then, okay, you sack the yellow matchup. That's what I'm doing with my Rebecca deck right now. But let's get into these actual cards here before this video gets too long, too rambly. So far, I hope I'm kind of expressed my point in my opinion. But let's address the elephant in the room. Should Rebecca and Moria get banned? No. Should they be restricted? No. I don't think either of these cards are in a state where they're going to be like, they're so insane. If any card in black gets hit, it should be Hina. That's just my firm opinion. I play black. I like black. I don't want to see this card hit. But if any card got hit, it's this card. And that's because it is too efficient for what it does. It develops a solid body. It helps you get to removal every time you need to. And if your opponent kills it, it just does that again. So this card is too efficient with Rebecca to give us the 8-cost Rebecca Lucci combo. It's too consistent with Moria, because Moria will be able to grab this and potentially something small to then pop a character, or Moria can grab Rebecca, which grabs Hina, and something small that pops a character. That's just nuts. Like, that's just good. Like, this card is consistently strong no matter what way you look at it. No matter how you look at it, this card is just too strong. It's too efficient. I guess is what I should say. It's too efficient. Now, if I hit this card, how does that change the game state? Well, how does that change how black plays? Well, that means that majority of black decks lose a good target that Rebecca can play consistently. You don't get the maximum value off of Rebecca almost at all at that point. Think about it. What other 3-cost would Rebecca want to play on there? Most of them are blockers. This is one of the few exceptions of cards that isn't. And the other exception would be Kyros, but that's in the Rebecca list, which is what this was supposed to be the interaction of, is Rebecca gets back her dad to play her dad. Like, that should be generally the reaction to a degree. Maybe Rebecca gets Luffy back and then plays dad with that. Like, that should be the combo that people were initially, I think this card was designed around. Hina was discovered as a card that has been sitting back for ages and is good. So what are the other benefits of getting rid of Hina outside of stifling the consistency of black's ability to reduce cost and control every format of any part of the board? Well, it helps new players, because now most of the cards you need are all within the last couple of sets. Exception being Borsellino and Kuzan, if you want to play decks with those. Yeah, those are going to be expensive, and that's a price that they're going to have to pay. But removing Hina is one less card from way back when that they have to be like, dang, I was not there for that, and I have to buy this card that's at like $20 because it needs to be in every blacklist. So you remove this card, it helps with the price aspect of it, but it does, from competitive integrity side of it, does stifle some of black's ability. It doesn't completely gut black, because you still have almost every other tool. Your recursive value tools are there. Your removal tools are still there. It just means you have to play around, okay, how easy is it actually for me to remove things? In the case of Sakazuki, 8-drop Moria is not bad anymore still. It doesn't make Moria just unplayably bad. You're still good because you can still get a Lucci. So if you swing with your lead on your 10, it makes Moria more of a 10-don turn potential though, right? Think about it. So if on your 10-don turn you swing with your leader, you then you ice age something, that puts something down 6 cost, your Lucci's still hitting it. So then you could drop your Lucci and pop something. Or you can play Moria, get a Lucci back, play it, and pop something. Or you can play your Moria, get a Suru and a Lucci, play the Suru rested, or screw it, play the Suru first. Suru then reduces another thing, and then you Lucci and you pop, 7 cost and a 3 cost. That's pretty good. You still have a lot of options. You still have a lot of playability. There's still a lot of different lines you can take. Removing Hina doesn't completely gut the deck. It just makes the consistency of the deck go down, and I think that's what it needs. It needs a tweak in that direction. The consistency and the threat level of the deck need to go down just a little bit so that other decks can come up a little bit more. Do I think that this deck is oppressive in its current state? No. Like I said, it does require quite a bit of skill to play. So personally, while I am recommending this, and I'm one of the few people that's recommending this, this is what I think would be the ban, or could be the ban. If we're looking at it of any card should be hit, this is the card that should be hit. It hurts black, but it doesn't gut black. And that is the line they need to tote. That's the line they need to make. And then it has some repercussions and benefits to new players, which is that they don't have to go chasing the super expensive card, which makes the decks more open for more players to try it out and get to see if they like it. Which is, I think, good, because that then, we might see a flood of it, which then makes the deck seem even worse because there's so many new people trying it that the deck statistically won't be doing nearly as good. It might be represented more, but then it's not nearly as good of a deck because percentage win rate wise, it goes down overall. So it could help shift that perception that the deck's a good deck. And then likewise with yellow, we can't really ban any of the problematic things, which is triggers. What would we do? Would there be a restriction on yellow? And the only thing I could say is if we are looking at restricting Charlotte Lin to 1, okay, my recommendation I still stand by. If we're going to do some type of restriction like that, then you need to hit all of the top end cards. You can't just leave it to 1, because now you're just saying your deck in particular doesn't get to play with your top end card. And so we need a restriction on all top end cards. And I think that the 7 to 10 cost range is those top ends. So 7 to 10 costs are reduced down to 2 cards. It means you get to play with multiples of them, but the ability to stack one right after the other is not a consistent thing that always happens. It's something that happens occasionally and is, yes, a strategy that you can win off of, but it's not a strategy you can play around. And I think that makes it more healthy for people. And then, yes, there's some arguments that would shift the game into a completely different meta game, and there's so many things that are unforeseen, blah, 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 blah. Most decks currently are running 2 to 3 copies of their top-end cards, the exception being the fact that yellow runs 4 10-cost moms, 4 Katakuris, 4 Yamatos. Like, yellow runs the excess of their boss cards the most, and blue probably the second most. The only other ones would be like green. You run 4 10-drop Dofi, but that's just because it's a solid finisher card that is capitalizing on your opponent trying to get greedy and end the game, and then you survive, and then you punish your opponent for trying to end the game too early. So it's a punishment card. It's not a card that you can proactively play. So Dofi's not necessarily a problem, but if you go down to 2 Dofis, is that a problem? Well, no, you still have you have a searcher for it. So like you have a couple searchers actually, potentially, depending on the colors that you end up playing. Is that a problem? No, I think that's actually fine. I think going down to 2 of them just means, like I said, your consistency of them isn't there, but you'll probably still see 1 a game. And if you still see 1 a game because you're running the searchers that look for them, that's the package you're going with, then, it should be your boss card. It should only need 1, maybe 2 of them to win the game. If your win con is to play 4 or 5 of them to close out a game, or all 4 of them to close out a game, you're already playing a very greedy deck. And if that deck gets hurt, then hey, you're gonna have to rebuild the list and find a more a better list. And, you know, yes, limiting it down to 2 stops yellow from being able to play so many triggers potentially, right? Like, that's my other theory with it, is if we limit how many top ends they have, they're either going to go one of 2 ways. They're going to play a crap ton more triggers, and just bank on triggers being their win condition, or they're going to cut down on the number of triggers because they need to be able to have more removal or more protection in a proper way. Or maybe their triggers are just more defensive triggers like Brulés and Sanjis and, you know, the stuff that, you know, a lot less of the, hey, I'm going to make a board threat with my trigger. Which I think is still okay, right? Like, if their triggers are defensive, that's fine. It's when they start getting a ton of card advantage or a ton of board state advantage. Like, I swing and did 3 damage to you, but now they've developed 3 attackers off of that, and one of them says that it gets double attack now because they're down less life than me. It's kind of problematic. So, I mean, the main problem with yellow is triggers, and the only way to really address that is by printing cards later that allow us to turn off our opponent's ability to have triggers that turn for a turn or a specific attack. Give us some type of way to turn a trigger off, or give us some type of way to give us banish more consistently. I think banish becomes unhealthy when it's too much of it, but just having an actual option in each color would be good. Black has the option of it. It's not a very good card though. So I mean, maybe, who knows, but that's my rant, guys. Oh yeah, I didn't mention Moby Dick. Don't unban this card. Whoever thought that from that article, which I will link it because I found the article, whoever thought this is a good unban, just completely wrong. This card is insane. If you're at 1 life, your leader gets plus 2k if it's Edward Newgate, and then all of your Whitebeard characters get plus 2k. Okay, cool. So we get to my late game turn where I've already developed a much stronger board than my opponent, and I'm already probably winning, even though I'm at less life than them because my deck always just goes down life. Now guarantees I win because for no Dawn investment, my characters are now all at least a 6k attack. Most of them probably 8k attacks. That's pretty dumb. We're gonna, like, you could just say this is dumb. Say, let's say your board state is blocker Marco, 5-drop Marco, and an ace. Let's just say you have 4 characters. Let's just say that that's your board state. Your opponent hasn't been able to remove them because the Marcos just are hard to remove, and the ace is somebody hard to remove. That's some reasonable board states for you to be going down to 1 life on, and then you play a Moby Dick. Okay, now all of a sudden, all of my characters have this. And it's not even on just your turn. All of my characters are now harder to kill on your opponent's turn. So let's say this comes out of life. Let's say you had 2 life and you didn't really want to, you're like, you know what, I'm going to take that life anyways, let's take it. Oh, look, trigger play. Now all my characters are bigger. My blocker is now 7k. I can now block whatever I want on your board. The next turn, you have an 8k swing from leader. You have a 9k swing from your ace. You have an 8k swing from your Marco and a 7k swing from your other Marco. With no Dawn investment. It's pretty dumb. This card needs to stay banned. I don't think this card comes back. Whoever thinks that this card is in a state right now where it's like, this can come back. No, we have 1 card that answers this card. It's in black. Nobody runs it. And if everybody's forced to run it, cool, I guess, but it's not a good card. You know, like, if I'm forced to run it because Newgate's running this, there's not another stage really that is being played that I can hit. That, like, there's nobody running any other stages. Like, this is a problematic card that only 1 color has an answer to, and that color running that card just feels really awkward and weird. So, like, if everybody had an answer to this, then yeah, I think that's an argument to be made. Like, you know, everybody has a way of dealing with stages. Okay, cool, fine, whatever. You can argue that Moby Dick can come back. Only 1 color has that answer, and it's the color that is one of the top decks. And yes, it could make less consistency in that deck if they have to run that, so maybe it's a way to counter that deck a little bit. But then that just leaves this deck to take over the meta against everybody else, and we fall back into the same meta that we were just in, where red was controlling for 4 sets. Let's not do that. Red had 4 sets. Let's let everybody else have the rest. All right, guys. I think I've made my points clear. Hope you enjoyed the video. I hope to see you guys in the next video. And if you have any comments, concerns, questions, anything of the sort, leave them down in the comments below. hit the like button. Subscribe, please. I appreciate it. And I hope to see you in the next video. Until then, have yourselves a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye, guys.